You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Termina هناك لشوارزنيجر.
Va a pegarle Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
Good day, good night, and welcome to Soccer Today. It's Monday, the Monday after the MLS Cup, and joining me today, Jonathan Tannenwald of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Jonathan, how are you doing on a Monday morning?
I'm all right. How are you?
I am doing pretty good. I finally caught up on some rest over the last few days. First of all, Jonathan, before we start to talk about your article that just came out, what are your thoughts on the Monday after the Cup?
Well, it's a crazy day because you've got MLS teams making all sorts of roster moves. We're going to have the free agency lists and the expansion draft protected lists today, just 2 days after the final. The season is so long now that there's really no off time at all.
No, training camp starts in less than 45 days, so that's going to be interesting. Your article, let's start there. Talk about the defensive side of the MLS Cup, a 0-0, and you made links to the Union, but it could be a blueprint that many of the teams in MLS can look for to how to have success or how to shut down big stars, having big center backs.
Well, I was thinking about that, and we do sort of fall into a trap sometimes of whatever the champion team does, every team in MLS ought to copy that. And it's not always the best thing, but in this particular case, I think it's a useful reminder that you can never go wrong having very good center backs. The Impact know it because of Laurent Simon. Obviously, we see with the Sounders with Chad Marshall and Roman Torres. As I wrote in my column that I just published this morning at philly.com/soccer, one of the biggest reasons why Toronto FC was able to make this run to the title game, obviously you have Javinko, Bradley, and Altidore, but for 8 of their 10 years, their biggest flaw by miles was their lack of good central defending. And we all knew it. Everybody up there knew it. And I don't think it's a coincidence that now that they've fixed that, they're where they are. And the Union dropped a lot of points in the latter stages of the season. While it's true that their attack was not good enough, CJ Sapong wasn't scoring goals. They dropped a lot of points because of mistakes that their young center backs made, especially Ken Tribbett, who I said multiple times was not good enough, and he got exposed again and again. And I'd like to see them go out and sign one good veteran center back to be in the mix with all the good young players that they have, both in terms of draft picks and the kids coming through their academy, who are good now and have the potential to be very good in the future. I just think that the roster needs that little bit more seasoning,
No, yeah, exactly. And it's the way Seattle approached it. Let's just bring it back to this example of Jovinko. When we saw him subbed out in the extra time of frustration, people were talking about, it might be against Vanny. I have a feeling it was directed to Roman Torres in a way, affecting to how he was defended against, where you might have the most amount of skills in this league. You might be the one player that can usually get around almost everybody. But if you go to percentages, probabilities, when you have a 6'2" against a 5'4", yeah, you could be faster, but sometimes it just feels like you hit the wall.
Well, on a couple of occasions, including twice in the first 15 minutes of the game, we saw Sebastian Javinko try to sort of back down Roman Torres, shielding the ball, trying to work Torres backwards, hold it up for somebody else. It's like Steph Curry trying to back down Joel Embiid. You know, you can't. It was just so clear. And with Josie Altidore and Chad Marshall, that's a fair fight because Altidore is a big boy and he can go, he can go up there with Marshall and go fight for the ball. And Altidore, I don't think it's a coincidence. He broke free a couple times. He had a couple shots on goal. He had what I thought was the best chance of all to win the game right in, the end of second half stoppage time. And Sebastian Fry makes that incredible diving save. If Fry is a half second later, that game's over and Altidore has the winning goal. But it was so stark. And Toronto couldn't find another way through. And I don't think it's a weakness on Toronto's part per se, because they had all of the pieces. I think Seattle just did a really good job defending. I voted for Roman Torres as my MVP of the game. I understand why Stephen Fry won. He made the spectacular saves. He had the highlight reel moments. I voted for Torres. I know a lot of other people who did. And, we talk all the time in around the world's game about how the defenders never win the awards, And I understand that a lot of people thought it was a dull and boring game, and it was in a lot of ways. But I just thought that Torres put on a masterclass, and he deserves the recognition for it.
Oh, it might have been a dull and boring first 90 minutes, but in overtime, in extra time, there was some chances. It went to penalties, the spectacle, the emotion, the sheer pressure on every kick. It was there. It's going to be talked about for a long time. The last 2 weeks of the MLS Cup playoff might have been the most drama-filled, emotion-filled, moment-filled moment in the playoff that we've seen in MLS in years. I can't even tell you, Jonathan, off the top of my head, over the last 2-3 seasons, a moment in the playoff that would compare to this year. Maybe it's the bias factor because I'm in Canada and Canada was heavily involved this year. But I cannot remember for the life of me the last 2-3 years a moment that would even equivalent to the Montreal-Toronto series, the Seattle-Colorado series with some moments, and the Seattle-Toronto game with the stop of Stephen Fry in the 98th minute. That moment's going to be etched in history. I wouldn't be surprised if there's eventually a stamp with Stephen Fry and his left paw hitting that ball down the road in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, I'm with you. I think these year's playoffs were terrific. And you know what? Cup finals, by and large, they tend to be pretty dour. And it's too bad because we all want them to be great. But, the Euro final this year was 1-0 and the goal was scored in the 109th minute. It was scoreless, after 90 minutes. The UEFA Champions League final was 1-1. The Copa America Centenario final was scoreless, went to penalties. The Champions League finals, I said, went to penalties. The MLS Cup final was scoreless and went to penalties. It happens. It stinks. We don't like it. We don't have to like it, but it happens. And I don't know that there's a way or a rule or whatever you can do to force a final to be an open game.
Well, you can't really, and it takes the purpose out of it because the only other option would be a home and away final like in the CONCACAF Champions League. And yeah, the first game usually could be a dull. We remember Copa America Montreal, the first leg in Estadio Azteca, 1-1, come back home and floodgates open in the second half and America really wants to go play for it. And if it would have been a one-off game, it would have been that the second half of the second game. So there's nothing really you could do to really make teams go out for it unless you bonus for goals in a final. I don't know, you give 100,000 more to the team if for every goal scored or something like that. Outside of a financial incentive, there's not really anything you could really do to make teams want to open up in a final cup game. The pressure, the amount of importance on every single play usually shuts it down.
And I don't want the final to go to 2 games. I think that would take away a lot of the spectacle of it. And I know like the NBA finals, the NHL finals, the World Series are 7 games. But in college sport, in college basketball, college football, the NFL, lots of places, we put everything into one championship game, and I think that's the way it ought to stay.
No, I agree with you. There's no other feeling in this world when the cup is on the line in a certain game. The pressure, the spectacle of it, I think, makes up for what could be a boring game usually. But to finish off the segment here, I probably know your answer, but I'll let you speak for it. The Toronto hosts as MLS Cup, the events before the Cup itself. How was your perception of MLS Cup week in Toronto?
Well, I only got into Toronto on Friday night, so I missed a lot of the fun stuff. I missed the party at the CN Tower. I missed all the press conferences and training sessions and things like that. But you could tell in the city that the buzz was there, that it was everybody was talking about. I watched the TV stations, read the papers and all that. It was all over the place. And you can tell that Toronto SC has really made an imprint on the city that a lot of, frankly, the American cities in MLS are jealous of. And all the times over the years when I've come on this show and its many predecessors and talked about things like this, and I've meant it, that the teams in Canada, Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, get so much more attention, are so much more a big-time part of their cities than a lot of the teams in MLS, especially here in Philadelphia, but also New York, Boston, Chicago, Dallas, Denver, some of the other big markets like that. And it's something I think, to respect and admire and hold up as a role model of what things can be. Now, obviously, the biggest part of that is if you're winning, it gets attention. And that's been the case everywhere for a long time. But I would note in particular, in fact, it makes me think of something that Joey Saputo said on, what was it, Friday, when he had his end of the season address?
Yes, Friday, same time, just before the State of the League. So at 11 on Friday.
The fans in Montreal respond to winning more than anything else. And I've said that too for many, many years, going back to when I was on Phil Germain's show, before this thing that we're on now got started. And back then was when Marco Di Vaio was around and Alessandro Nesta was around, and the Impact were looking for a star player who could bring the big crowds and things like that. And I said consistently over the years, from the people who I knew in Montreal, that I suspected pretty strongly that they wanted a winning team more than anything else. And obviously having Drogba has helped a lot in terms of marketing, perception, and all these things. But they got 60,000 people to that playoff game because it was a playoff game. And it was against Toronto, obviously. But I can tell even from down here, being from afar, never mind when I'm up there, when the Impact of winning, what kind of a buzz it's creating in the city now, that it's attracting the soccer fan base in the city, not only of the people who've been Impact fans since they were in the second division, but of the other soccer fans in the city who are coming to Stade Saputo now and making that team their own.
Yeah, there's a big difference. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we will talk about how Seattle won it.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
Big game, big saves, not a lot of goals, but penalties. Jonathan, if you had to describe Seattle's performance in just a few words as a whole, what would it be?
Smart. I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but they weren't there to entertain and make friends, They were there to win a championship. Brian Schmetzer was there to win a championship, and he went out and did it. And I think he's done such a great job since taking over for Ziggy Schmidt. I think people know by now that I've been a critic of Ziggy Schmidt for a while. Obviously he's won a lot of games. He's got a lot of players who swear by him. He's been mostly successful over the years. But as I've said before, and I'll say again, Ziggy Schmidt's biggest flaw by a lot was that when he had versatile players on his roster, he would often put them in the wrong positions. And you have a lot of versatile players in Major League Soccer, both because you're signing these young kids out of college who maybe have been a forward and a defender over the years in their lives. You got to figure out where to play them. And because the nature of the game now especially if you play sort of a 4-3-3. Your players have to be flexible and their roles aren't necessarily defined specifically. And so, I mean, look at Eric Zavaleta is a great example who's thrived in Toronto as a central defender. When he was drafted by the Sounders, he had played as a forward and as a center back at Indiana University. Nobody knew what Ziggy Schmidt was going to do with him, and he was a bust, or so it seems. He came to Toronto, and Greg Vanney sorts him out. You look at Seattle now, with Schmetzer. Schmetzer sorted out all those positions on the field. He defined what everybody's roles were, and they went out and won a championship. I don't think it's coincidental.
And we had obviously a great game by Stephen Fry that made the big saves at the big moments. But same thing could be said for Toronto. It was a 0-0 on both sides going into penalties, and both keeper stopped the goal in the penalty shootout. And you cannot really ask more of a keeper than to save one. In the 5, you at least give an opportunity. And Justin Morrow's foot hit that ball that hit the crossbar. It wasn't Clint Herwin's fault. When you're looking at the spectacle that happened in penalties, we know people say it's not deserved, it's deserved. Do you feel the winning in penalties takes away from that win, or is it's the game's played that way? It's part of it.
The game is played that way. It's unfortunate, and I hope that Michael Bradley goes and buys Clint Irwin a nice steak dinner in town, because the fact that Irwin saved the penalty meant that people would forget about Bradley missing his. It's funny, MLS used to have the old shootout where there was a clock and you would start your run 35 yards out or whatever it was.
That was awesome.
And you have to make a play. Now, I wasn't a fan of that per se. And I think I probably wasn't a fan of it more because of the clock than anything else, but the clock was probably necessary in the end. But I also think that when people try to come up with an idea for whether anything is better than penalties, you get two schools of thought. One is to have them play overtime endlessly, which I don't really like. I think it wears the players out. You can do it in hockey because you have line changes and things like that. You can't in soccer. You have, more ground to cover. You don't have a limit on substitute. Sorry, you have a limit on substitutions. You have the outdoor elements and so on and so forth, whether it's altitude, weather, whatever it may be. And then the other school of thought is, well, is there a way to conduct a shootout that's not just taking penalties? And I've wondered more than once over the years whether, if some other country beside the United States had come up with the shootout complex if some other country had come up with the shootout idea that MLS created, I wonder if people would be more amenable to it. But because the United States did it as an American thing, so we can't have that in international soccer.
Yeah, it's true though. If England, if the FA would have come up with a new way to do it, maybe people would not have dismissed it out of hand. Just it's similar to the XFL, right? Because of ideas that the XFL had, and it was a bust after a year. People forget, but there was maybe one or two things that were interesting in that actually been used by other leagues after. So no, you're right. Maybe sometimes who changes a rule makes a big difference if that rule is taken seriously or not.
I got nothing. It was a long time ago, and it was. Yeah. I'm glad that Major League Soccer plays by the rules of the international game. I think that matters in terms of perception. It matters in terms of bringing fans on board who are fans of the international game, who are fans of Mexican soccer or English soccer or Italian soccer or whatever. But nobody's come up with a better way yet than the penalty shootout. It's unfortunate, but as I said earlier, if either of those chances by Altidore goes in, we're not even talking about it. So,
speaking of Altidore, how historic, or we use that parable way too much, but how important was he, not just for Toronto, but the run that he's been on up until the final, the 5 straight games with scoring in the playoff and great assists and the creativity? Is it sustainable for Altidore? That's been the question throughout his career, and even this year because of injuries earlier on. hopefully, do you think we're going to get Altidore at the same level heading to next year and the future? Who knows where that future will be after next year? But for Altidore, what do you see in the near future?
All he's got to stay healthy. And I think he's probably got to stay in Toronto too. Look, the thing about Josie Altidore is he's a striker who is at his best when he's confident. And Jurgen Klinsmann liked to slate him up and down, and the coaches in the Premier League like to slate him up and down. And I've never been a soccer coach. I admit that up front. If your listeners want to throw me in the, in the Schuylkill River or whatever, because I have never coached soccer and they have, then what can I do? But it sure seems to me that if you have a striker who has the physical gifts and the skill to score goals the way Josie Altidore does, and he needs confidence, why not give him confidence? You want to light a fire under him every once in a while. That's fine. I mean, he'll accept that too. He would accept that too. He's a stand-up guy. But why not put a guy like him in a situation that helps him succeed, not that holds him back from succeeding? And if that means psychologically, then that means psychologically. And I know that Bruce Arena is going to do that. I'm pretty sure that whoever succeeds Bruce Arena is going to do that. And if he's healthy going into Russia, and the U.S. lineup can pick from Jordan Morris, Bobby Wood, and Josie Altidore as the top three strikers, that's not bad.
But
I will say this too. Granted, MLS is not the Bundesliga. It's not Serie A. We've had that debate forever. But Josie's best times with the national team, for the most part, have also come when he scoring a lot of goals for his club team, no matter the level. And then that translates on.
Scoring goals is scoring goals, Jonathan. You're absolutely right. Doesn't matter if you score in an empty net in a deserted park or with a big club. When you score a goal, you learn to score goals. And the more you score, the more you'll score.
And that's why I think that Altidore is in the right place right now, and Jordan Morris is in the right place right now. Now, Jordan Morris might not stay in Seattle forever. He might only be there for 2 or 3 years or whatever. But he has shown that he can handle having some pressure on his shoulders and the kind of pressure that is created by being in Seattle and being the leading guy with Clint Dempsey out injured.
You mentioned Jordan Morris, so we'll finish this segment with him because his future and the future of the U.S. men's national team are closely related. The way he has bloomed after his snub by Klinsmann for the Copa America has really been impressive. The way he was able to get service, yes, by Lodero, and it's a dynamic duo, so you need two to party. But Jordan Morris was able to take advantage of situation where he had, even like in the playoffs against Colorado, that chip goal. Jordan Morris has been impressive. What are your thoughts on Jordan Morris and the fact that he is one of the rare case of a highly touted prospect starting his pro career with an MLS team?
Well, I hope we're going to see it more. And that doesn't mean that these guys have to stay in MLS forever. It doesn't mean they should stay in MLS forever. But I don't see what's wrong with starting there, playing for a few years, and then, sell them on to Europe and go make some money. But, I hope we see Austin Trusty in Philadelphia next year. I hope that we see Balou Jean-Yves Tabla on the field for the Impact at some point next year. And I hope, obviously Dallas is the role model. We heard Joey Saputo talk about the fact that Dallas is the role model. But if you want to be like Dallas, then you have to make the commitment to play your young players. You have to not just say you're going to do it, not just put them on the roster, but give them significant minutes in games at the senior level. And I take the Union as an example because they have Austin Trusty and Derek Jones in the midfield, who are two guys who are their top academy prospects who they signed to senior level contracts last year. We've got to see this year whether they're going to get on the field and play. And if they're not good enough, then they're not good enough. But let's find out. Let's hope that they get out there on the field, maybe not starting, but that they get out there and play.
Speaking of getting out there and play, after the break, we will be talking about Minnesota Atlanta, two totally different philosophies heading into their first season in Major League Soccer. You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS postgame show, open lines after dark, 5 rings daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. One thing that didn't grab everybody's attention this week is the little moves and the signing of Almiron by Atlanta and the non-moves by Minnesota. They got a lot of people wondering. Yes, Minnesota's going to break ground today for their stadium. But Jonathan, when you just look at what player they have signed so far, what sticks out to you between Minnesota and Atlanta?
I'm waiting on Minnesota to pass judgment. I really want to see if they are able to do a deal that gets Christian Ramirez up into MLS, because I think he has the potential to be a very good player for them. Atlanta, look, there's no way around the fact that Atlanta United has so much more money than Minnesota does, because they've got the Atlanta Falcons and all the sponsorship deals coming out of the new stadium and things like that. So they've gone out and signed Hector Villalaba, who's an Argentine winger, and Miguel Almiron, who's this Paraguayan playmaker, who they spent $8 million for and is going to be one of their big stars. But I think the just as important moves that Atlanta is making are the homegrown players that they have signed, including the stud Andrew Carlton, who has a potential to be a really, really great U.S. national team player. Minnesota's obviously got a lot of moves that they need to make over time. I don't think they're done yet. They're not going to be Atlanta. They're not going to be a Seattle, or an Orlando and things like that. But Orlando didn't quite get to where they thought they were going to get to. They haven't yet. They went young and they signed Kaká, and they haven't quite gotten to the playoffs. And, they changed managers and this and the other thing. But it's awfully tough to do what Seattle has done. And I also know that it took Seattle 7 years to finally win the big one. They won a Supporters' Shield.
U.S. Open Cups.
Couple of U.S. Open Cups. And I'll tell you what, Seattle did a lot to legitimize the U.S. Open Cup in the eyes of MLS fans who might not have paid that much attention to it otherwise.
Yeah, especially in their stretch that they had 3 in a row that they got?
It was like 4 and 5 or 6 years or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. But it's interesting, because of course you mentioned the difference of money heading into the club, but there seem to be a different type of philosophies too, and there have been more tools for them, more allocation, especially target allocation money that is needed when you launch a club. Yes, you're going to have your DPs and your homegrowns, but the allocation is going to help you, especially the TAM allocation is going to help you to build that depth, that number 4 to number 13 spot on your roster. That is the difference in a season. And for me, Atlanta seemed to be doing what's needed to be done to have some money left in that aspect, because you're talking about Almiron, young DP status, which leaves DP spots open, but it leaves space on your salary cap too. And that's a very smart move when you look at it.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that. And, this moving towards young designated players is something that we've all hoped for a long time. And it seems to finally be happening now. They might not sell as many tickets right off the bat, but if the players are entertaining and they're creative, people will show up. I mean, Ignacio Piatti's not a bad example, of the kind of player who can do very well in MLS, become a star, and who, by the way, MLS has a long history of South American players, especially playmakers, thriving in this league and being stars, all the way back to Carlos Valderrama and Marco Echeverri in the league's very earliest years. And I'm always happy to see more of a South American influence in the league, because it makes, it makes the games more entertaining. it makes the and it teaches those American players some of those skills. I'm sorry that I'm stuttering. I'm stuttering because I've got breaking news coming in right now
Go ahead.
to my phone as we speak, and it is something that has an impact in Canada. And I'm going to tweet it out in just a second here.
That's the benefit of a live show, Jonathan, when we can have breaking news breaking into our show. So, breaking news regarding North American soccer, I presume.
Julie Stewart-Binks of Fox Sports, who is from Toronto and has worked in Canada a lot over the years, has moved to ESPN.
Oh, well, congratulations to maybe that, because she covers Major League Soccer, especially. So,
she used to work for the CBC. She worked on Hockey Night in Canada. She worked on CTV.
Doesn't have any soccer interest behind that move, because she did cover a lot of MLS and was present at the Montreal and Toronto final. Will ESPN give more of coverage to MLS and not just the rest of the entire world of soccer?
They already give it a lot.
Yeah, a lot more than they used to. Absolutely.
I don't think that's the only move that ESPN is making. I can't say anything more than that.
Well, it's interesting. 2019 will be a great time for the coverage of soccer and the rights in the United States. All right, Jonathan, when we're looking at the future of North American soccer the next 2 years, before we move on to the next segment, USL, NASL, it's been crazy. A lot of speculation over the last 2 weeks. The death of the Cosmos, the rebranding of the Railhawks. Quickly, what are your thoughts right now? Do you think the USL will be, or do you think it's done, the D2 and the ramifications of this?
Sorry, say that. I tripped over the question a bit. Say that again.
USL, NASL, the death of the Cosmos, D2 probably for the USL. What's going to be the ramification of it all heading into 2017?
Oh, gosh.
Good luck.
Oh, boy. I don't know yet.
It's interesting.
But I've said a lot of it over the years that I really think that I really think that if the NASL goes away, it will improve the odds of pro rail happening someday, not decrease the odds. Because I just think that Traffic Sports' involvement in the NASL was such a stumbling block for MLS, for Soccer United Marketing. They were never going to work together, because that's sort of the whole point of their existence. And I think even if it's not when Don Garber is in charge of MLS anymore, I think someday you will see pro rail between MLS and the USL in the manner that is done in Spain and Europe, where the reserve teams play play in the second division and they can't go up.
But some teams can.
Right. The non-affiliated teams can.
Exactly. Like Real Madrid is not going to go to La Liga, but Real Madrid B, but they can stay in the second division if they're good enough.
Right.
And just to clarify, Julie Stewart-Binks was hired as a soccer sideline reporter for ESPN. So interesting to see, because right now ESPN have some rights to some games, talking about the game of the week and all that. But it'll be interesting to see how often we see her on the sideline.
Yes, I think she's going to be a sideline reporter. I have also, and now I can say it, I was sitting on it since the weekend. Sebastian Salazar, who I don't think many of your listeners will know, because he's been based down in the United States for his entire career in the Washington, D.C. area. He's going to ESPN2 to be a sideline reporter, to do some of their college soccer things. He's a good friend of mine, as is Julie. I'm very happy for both of them. And if it leads to an increased, obviously, amount of games on ESPN, I'm not complaining. And also, if, and this is a very big if, and I'm sticking my neck out there not knowing a lot of facts, but if as a part of all of these moves, ESPN is lining something up with the National Women's Soccer League, I'll be pretty happy.
That's true, though. It's always a point of discontent, the coverage of the NWSL in the United States and the lack of opportunity of to become superstars. And if more games are on TV for the NWSL, more power to the league, and it gives more exposure, it gives more, it helps the brand in industry terms, where you can rise the profile of the perception of your team, helps fill the stadium, and everybody's a winner, because then you got a healthy women's soccer league, which means more opportunities, which means more teams, which means more players, which means better development. So it's all a circle.
Well, look, the NWSL has the potential to be a very good product, and you know it's got the American players, it's got the Canadian players, it's got the big names, as we all know. And, it's all coming in the context of the collective bargaining with the U.S. women's team and the federation and all that. But the league's been pretty successful so far, and it's not going anywhere. And when you have look, there's going to be some games in the NWSL that don't draw big on TV, and there's going to be some that draw big numbers. But when you have, say, a Portland against Chicago, when you have Tobin Heath and Kristen Press and Julie Johnston and Morgan, and not Morgan Prime, but all of those, Lindsey Horan is what I was thinking of. There's more than enough star power in the NWSL for people to pay attention.
Absolutely.
Live radio, friends, it's the best.
Exactly. We'll take a small break, and we'll finish to finish the show with MLS USL, the future of that partnership, inspired by the demise of the FC Montreal last Friday. We will have a conversation that is very useful in the next few years to come.
You are listening to SPN Radio, powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
So long, FC Montreal. You were all well and good for 2 years. But for many different reasons, FC Montreal is no more. Ottawa Fury has become the official affiliate of the Montreal Impact in the USL, keeping their identity, keeping their roster independence, but will have a few players as loan from the Montreal Impact Academy. Jonathan, first of all, you're close to the Montreal market, and you have been following what's going on in the USL and MLS partnership for a few years now. What is your first thought on the demise of FC Montreal?
It's unfortunate, but I also think, and Joey Saputo alluded to how much it was costing the team to do. And it has to be said that a lot of the MLS teams that run their own USL teams don't necessarily want to admit this, but it costs a lot of money. And you can say, as some of the teams do and have, from a philosophical perspective, it's a worthwhile investment. It's what they want to do. You develop a good enough player, you sell them, you make a lot of that money back. But the dollar figure is still pretty big,
Exactly. The philosophy of having a top team of your academy that's there to literally see if players can cut it or not, and cross that last step before becoming a quote-unquote full-fledged professional. Yes, it's a full-fledged professional setting, but the way that they treated that top academy team, I'm talking about FC Montreal, but it could be the case for Toronto and Vancouver. Vancouver, a little different model, but Toronto was very similar. So it'll be interesting to see what TFC does in the next few years, having maybe a little bit more money to not waste, but to spend in different spot that you don't necessarily see the gain right away. And that's another thing too. You don't see the result of FC Montreal project in 2 years. It'll take 4, 5. The development pathway is not ready-made established. It needs to be bridged in, and you need a few years to do this. So the fact that they threw in the towel after 2 years for not seeing necessarily the gain compared to the investment is interesting. But the opportunity, the fact that Ottawa moved to USL, I think everything surrounding this aspect, the demise of the NASL, I think it's all related to Montreal having an opportunity to get out of their 3-year commitment with the USL.
Well, you know more about that than I do. But when I saw this move happen, I thought, okay, it's going to cost them a little less. They'll be able to move players, to the USL plenty often. It's going to be, they talk about, that they're going to fast track more, 17, 18-year-old players into the first team. I'll believe that when I see it.
Yeah, I agree with you.
But I can't help thinking it's not the worst thing in the world for the Montreal Impact to have a beachhead in Ottawa.
That is very true. And just to go with that thought, Joey Saputo alluded to it during his address last Friday. He mentioned that he sent Balou Tabla on a training stint with Bologna to assess if it was worth it to continue investing in that type of players. Basically saying to evaluate our own evaluation to make sure that we see something in the kid and to validate that perception of a prospect. That's the reason why they send him elsewhere. And so that's interesting too, to make sure that, because in a way they want to make sure that what they see in a kid is true. So they're evaluating their own evaluating staff in a way. And that says a lot. I've been to a few FC Montreal games over the last 2 years. And at some point when the higher brass of the Montreal Impact were there, they were not satisfied. They were not happy. They were not impressed by the development of certain players. And I think because of the lack of players that shone through the team over the last 2 years, that started the questioning if this was the right way to approach it. And I don't think we can even answer that question right now, if the MLS 2 sides in USL is a right or wrong way to approach it now. I think it's still too early after 2 years of full partnership, 3 for some team like Los Dos. I think a mix of different, like Los Dos and Seattle too, were beneficial for both those teams. We've seen Seattle won the MLS Cup with Schmerzer, which was the one that helped S2 become successful in the first few years. So you do have a lot of correlation between success and the MLS2 partnership. And I think it might not necessarily be a mistake, but the judgment call made by the Montreal Impact towards that investment just after 2 years, that might be a little too much too soon.
It might be. And look, I think one of the biggest benefits of having your own USL team is having your academy, your USL team, and the senior team all in the building together, training together. I can't tell you how tangible a benefit that is, but in terms of club culture and player development pathways, everything I've heard and I've seen is that it's great. And we'll see what the Impact do going forward. In a way, it's like minor league baseball, in that you're training somewhere else that's not too far away. I mean, Ottawa's 2 hours?
Yeah.
Not like they're far away.
No, exactly. It's still just a call and a little drive away, or you take a plane and it's just a hop, skipping away.
Right. So I don't think it's that bad. The Fury guy, the Fury fans might be upset that they're sort of being co-opted. I get that. I have some sympathy for that.
Yeah, well, Paul Dalglish, at least on Twitter, right after that announcement, did a Q&A and answered questions from the fans and mentioned that they'll keep their play identity. They'll be the one dictating how they play, and they will have a working relationship with the Impact, but more towards the player personnel than the team identity or roster or how that team is managed. That will be Ottawa's to do. Montreal will be usually between 4 and 5 players. If you look at other affiliation over the last few years in USL, is going to happen. Speaking of affiliation, MLS USL heading into the 3rd season next year of full-fledged partnership. What will we see, Jonathan? Will we see more FC Montreal or more partnership like Reno, San Jose, where you run a team, we'll have some input on the soccer side, but more just a few players, and that bridge being established?
I really don't know. I really don't know. By the way, I'm curious with two things about Ottawa. One is what's going to happen in the Voyageurs Cup.
Yeah. Well, it's been announced that they will be part of the Voyageurs Cup because of the fact that they're an affiliate and not a full-fledged reserve team.
So are they going to be contractually barred from playing the impact players in the tournament? They're going to be
probably something similar
cup
to that.
tied or who knows what.
Exactly. Well, a player, if he plays for Ottawa, he might not be eligible to play for Montreal, or if you probably go with how the rest of the world works in those situations.
So you go back and forth. Are you playing for Montreal in the Champions League but not in the Voyageurs Cup? I don't know.
That's interesting. It depends if you're cup tied or not.
And the second part of that is how much of a commitment is this by Ottawa for more than a year or so?
Yeah, that's very interesting because we'll see with the rise of the Canadian Premier League, when it does happen, it is tangible now. There is some people that have been hired. Paul Byrne, which was very instrumental. He was in the building of Toronto FC, especially with the supporter grassroots that they have since beginning. He was a big part of that. So the fact that he's working for the Canadian Premier League, that's the working title name of the league, it's going to be very important for Ottawa. The fact that they're now, I don't know how it worked, if they have the same benefit that FC Montreal had in the USL, having to respect the quotas and such, but it might have been a way to soften the blow and take Ottawa further from the Premier League, then closer, if they have that USL quote unquote sanction and that FC Montreal had. That was a question that was arised when Ottawa decided to go from the NSL to the USL. CSA has been openly saying over the last few years that it would not sanction teams that play in American leagues if they wouldn't comply to their quotas, and if long term they would rather them play in their own league. So that has been a case in the PDL with Thunder Bay and other teams, and it's been the case, would have been maybe the case with Ottawa if that FC Montreal / Impact Montreal with Ottawa partnership hasn't come to play.
I'm starting to think that the CSA is going to lose that fight.
It looks to be very complicated to get the big three MLS markets involved in anyway, and even Edmonton and Ottawa for that matter, in the Premier League project.
I got one more question for you.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Have you had your 16 free chicken wings yet?
Going tonight. That's what happens when the Montreal Canadiens score 10 goals. Funny story. I was in the outdoor press box. I was kind of chilly, but going in back a few times to get warmed, somebody looked at me like, check the score of the Habs game. It's an avalanche of goal, and no pun intended. Well, actually, pun intended. They were playing Colorado. And I know you like Colorado, Jonathan, so I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, right.
No, exactly. The quote unquote Patrick Quadra. Yeah. Just when you look at MLS, USL next year, is it a very important year for that partnership? What could be the future of it? Because the Super Draft as well has not necessarily yielded the top instrumental, important, key changer, game changer type of players for the MLS. And the last 2 years, sorry, no, it hasn't. Exactly.
It never has.
Yeah, that's true. But you do see some of those coming from the academy side and the homegrown side. So does the Super Draft lose a bit of its appeal when the best players that you can have in that draft are not in that draft?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that the draft is going to get changed in the years to come. And, it's going to be less and less of a deal. But if you have an opportunity to bring in players, then take it.
And I have a theory, because it's based on other leagues. If you go to the NFL, yes, it's very similar. It's the NCAA. After the NCAA, you get a draft. Very similar to basketball. But in basketball and hockey, you can declare yourself for the draft a lot earlier. What if the only qualification for the MLS Super Draft was being, I was going to say 18, but in the world of soccer, 18 is even older. What if you're 16 and older? You can declare yourself for the draft.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think you want as few players going through the draft as possible, honestly. The reason why you have to have it is because there's just too many players out there to have it be a complete, wide open field.
True, but
I it's. I don't know all the way what I think. I don't entirely mind the draft. I think that it could be 2 rounds instead of 4 or something like that.
okay.
I don't mind having an event that's MLS centric at the end. I think the biggest value in the super draft, everybody knows this, is that it's a major event at the NSCAA convention where all the people go, the media goes, the fans go, all the coaches and the GMs are in the same room for the only day all year. That's the value of it. And then you get a player or 2 out of that, maybe.
I agree with that 100%. That's why I'm thinking, because you want to get players like Jordan Morris, or you want to give other teams the opportunity of getting Jordan Morris, because sometimes you're just geographically lucky.
Jordan Morris is a bad example because he was a homegrown player.
Yes, but those talents, that's what I mean. You're geographically lucky. A talent arose in your setting. And yes, it was you, but you weren't the guy who trained him when you was like 8, 9, 10. Some cases, yes, but we haven't seen those players yet in Major League Soccer because it's still a ongoing process for the academies over the last decade. But yes, Jordan Morris might not be the best example. But what I mean is you want to give teams that might not have the best amount of local product like this a chance to have a young whiz kid maybe.
Then go out and get the one in your market. Let the draft be for the late bloomers who come through college and things like that. But a lot of these MLS teams are not scouting their own markets well enough for talent.
Oh, that's true.
Especially when it comes to the Hispanic population. That's a whole other hour's worth of a show.
Oh yeah, if you look at academies throughout the league, there's a big disparity between top academies and less than top academies, and you see the yield of players, not necessarily just for that team, but usually across the board and across different leagues as well. All right, Jonathan, before we wrap up the show, what is the one thing you're looking forward the most in the next week or two in the off season? The expansion draft? Are you looking for the today the names that are announced? What is the one thing you're looking forward to?
I'm most looking forward to the re-entry draft because I think there's going to be a real opportunity for the Philadelphia Union to upgrade their defense. There's going to be some good players who are available. And a smart GM will go out and get that player, whether at the current contract or renegotiating a new one, and potentially help.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today on the show. And until tomorrow, 11 a.m. for Soccer Today, well, have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.